It was just a game of chess, but it meant so much more. Iceland, 1972. America's finest player, Bobby Fischer, was about to take on Russian legend Boris Spassky. It was the height of the Cold War. Nixon was in the White House, Brezhnev in the Kremlin. The tournament was considered a symbolic battle between the two greatest powers in the world. It was held in Iceland, midway between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. The Soviets had held the title since World War II. That is, until Fischer won.
He had such a dominating personality, such a fierce will to win in every circumstance, that the psyches of his opponents crumbled.
It was as if he'd claimed victory for the U.S. not just in chess, but in the Cold War. But Fischer's brilliance was quickly eclipsed by his idiosyncrasies. He gave up the title in 1975 when he refused to defend it. Then he went into hiding. He resurfaced in 1992 in Yugoslavia for a widely publicized rematch against Spassky. He won yet again. But the U.S. government claimed Fischer had violated UN sanctions against Yugoslavia, imposed to punish Serb leader Slobodan Milosevic, and revoked his U.S. passport. Fischer again disappeared. He popped up from time to time, giving interviews around the world, but some say his behavior grew more bizarre as the years passed, often making anti-Semitic remarks, praising the September 11th attacks, and calling the U.S. evil.
Fischer was a source of inspiration for all young players, and I think it was a great loss for the game of chess that he stopped playing and instead entered a very strange state of mind, making statements that were very detrimental for the promotion of our game.
In 2005, he renounced his American citizenship and moved to Iceland, where he would die in a hospital 3 years later.
He was a loner. He must have had an awful time in the last years in Iceland. Told he spent his time wandering around bookshops and that, trying to find something interesting.
His former opponent, Boris Spassky, said he was very sorry to hear of Fischer's death. Despite his eccentricities, he'll be remembered as the winner of the chess match of the century.
Former world chess champion Bobby Fischer has died. He was a chess prodigy as a child, learning to play the game at the age of 6, and was a grandmaster by 15. In a classic 1972 showdown, Fischer beat Soviet master Boris Spassky. And chess champion Garry Kasparov says Fischer was a pioneer of the modern game.
I would say that Fischer was a pioneer of the professional chess, and it's not only about his great opening ideas or his contribution to the middle game and the general quality of his chess. He was the great warrior. So for him, the game of chess was not only a piece of art, but also an element of the psychological warfare.
Now, at the chessboard, Fischer was brilliant, but away from the game, he led a bit of a troubled life. He's been wanted by U.S. authorities since 1992 when he defied U.S. sanctions against Yugoslavia and played a rematch with Spassky, winning $3.5 million. After beating him a second time, Fischer spent the rest of his life in exile, often making anti-U.S. and anti-Semitic remarks publicly. He was 64 years old.
To report tonight, Bobby Fischer. He was a chess genius. Many thought a mad genius. He was a grandmaster at 15, at the time the youngest to ever achieve that designation. Then in 1972, at age 29, he won the world championship from a Soviet, Boris Spassky, in a match filled with Cold War symbolism. But then he threw it all away, dropping from sight, becoming a recluse. He emerged 20 years later to win a rematch and $3 million in Yugoslavia. But because of U.S. sanctions against Yugoslavia, he became a fugitive until Iceland gave him citizenship. He made headlines in recent years with hateful rants against Jews and the U.S. Bobby Fischer died yesterday at age 64.
Here at Henry, thanks. Our big story in our 6 o'clock hour is breaking news. World chess champion Bobby Fischer has died in Iceland. Fischer was an eccentric genius. He was a U.S. chess champion at the age of 14 and a grand master at 15. At the height of the Cold War, Bobby Fischer became an American hero, beating Russian chess champion Boris Spassky in a famous series of games in 1972 and claiming America's first World Chess Championship in more than a century's time. Fischer then fell into obscurity after refusing to defend his title. Then he resurfaced to win an exhibition rematch against Spassky. Ultimately, he renounced his American citizenship and moved to Iceland. Bobby Fischer dying of unknown causes at the age of 64.
Bobby Fischer, the chess master who became an icon of the Cold War, has died in Iceland. Fischer was born in Chicago and raised in Brooklyn. He was a U.S. chess champion at age 14 and a grand master at 15. He gained worldwide fame in 1972 when he beat the Soviet Union's Boris Spassky as world chess champion. The event had tremendous symbolic importance for the two countries, but Fischer's reputation as a chess genius soon was eclipsed by his strange behavior, including praising the September 11th attacks and making anti-Semitic remarks. Bobby Fischer was 64. The Associated Press.
The world of sports has lost another giant. Bobby Fischer, the chess master, has died at the age of 64. I know. Dear Rome, Bobby Fischer died. Checkmate. Don't send me that email. I've already received about 200 of them. No, really, I have. Anyway, Fischer died in a hospital in Iceland of kidney failure. He had moved there back in 2005 after defying international sanctions for playing a rematch against Boris Spassky in Yugoslavia. Then again, Iceland has been described as, quote, chess mad. Chess mad. I mean, what does that even mean? Football is the secular religion of this country. Chess must be theirs. I mean, I've never been to Iceland, but do they all gear up and then hit their local bars to represent their favorite players on the weekends? I mean, are there Fischer bars and Spassky bars and Kasparov bars? Or do they just go dressed up as their favorite chess pieces? If a dude is rocking his bishop gear, does that mean he can only move across the bar diagonally? If a woman is dressed like one of those horses, does that mean she can only take 2 steps forward and then 1 to the right or left? And how about the losers who are dressed up as the pawn? I mean, how long would it take to actually get a beer when you can only approach the bar 1 floor tile at a time? And do you have other freaks dressed as rooks who are constantly picking you off? Chess mad. Iceland sounds like a pretty rockin' country. I mean, what do they do for bachelor parties? Do they get after it with cribbage? Play Chinese checkers on New Year's Eve? Anyway, thoughts and prayers to Grandmaster Fish.
Bobby Fischer, el gran maestro de ajedrez que fue campeón del mundo entre 1972 y 1975, ha muerto, según un portavoz suyo citado por la radio nacional islandesa. Su verdadero nombre era Robert James Fischer, tenía 64 años, vivía en Islandia desde el año 2005 con nacionalidad islandesa y estatus de refugiado político, perseguido por traición en su país natal, en Estados Unidos. Nació en Chicago, aunque su familia era de origen alemán. Sus padres se divorciaron cuando tenía apenas 2 años y descubrió el ajedrez a los 6 años, cuando fue a vivir a Brooklyn. Allí aprendió por sí mismo el juego, leyendo las instrucciones. Su hermana le regaló un pequeño ajedrez para que no se aburriera en casa cuando se quedaba solo. Al principio jugaba contra ella, pero pronto necesitó adversarios de mayor nivel. A la edad de 7 años se unió al club de ajedrez de Brooklyn. Fischer dejó el instituto sin graduarse. Varios profesores decían que era un joven difícil con comportamientos antisemitas porque peleaba constantemente con sus compañeros judíos. A los 14 años de edad ganó el campeonato de Estados Unidos. Después fue famoso por su victoria contra el soviético Boris Spassky en el match del siglo, la partida del siglo. En 1992, coincidiendo con los 20 años de esta partida, participó en un torneo de exhibición. Volvió a vencer a su antiguo rival y se embolsó el premio de $3 millones que había ofrecido un magnate yugoslavo. Pero en ese momento Belgrado estaba bajo el bloqueo del gobierno de los Estados Unidos y la acción de Fischer fue considerada en su propio país como un acto de traición. Antes de irse a Islandia fue arrestado en Japón por usar el pasaporte estadounidense que Washington había cancelado.
Morre aos 72 anos o ex-campeão mundial de xadrez norte-americano Bobby Fischer. A notícia foi divulgada por um canal de TV da Islândia, onde vivia. As circunstâncias da morte ainda são desconhecidas. De personalidade forte e controversa, Fischer começou a jogar aos 6 anos de idade e disputou a partida do século em um torneio de mestres em 1956, quando tinha apenas 13 anos. Ele foi 8 vezes campeão de xadrez dos Estados Unidos.
O americano Bobby Fischer era uma espécie de Pelé do xadrez. Excêntrico e controverso, ele morreu hoje na Islândia com 64 anos e quase 190 de QI.
Mais do que um campeão mundial de xadrez, ele foi um símbolo de uma vitória do Ocidente num campo dominado pelo inimigo, a União Soviética. Ao vencer a disputa contra Boris Spassky em 1972, aos 29 anos, o norte-americano Bobby Fischer se tornou um personagem da Guerra Fria e abriu um buraco na cortina de ferro. Virou um popstar. Talvez tenha sido um pouco demais para o garoto tímido, criado separado do pai, que encontrou no xadrez uma forma, a única talvez, de se relacionar com o mundo. Este professor de xadrez garante, não foi o jogo que fez Bob Fischer ser meio esquisito. Ele sempre foi assim.
Na verdade, o xadrez foi uma retaguarda de expressão, de forma de atuar, de forma de se manifestar, em que essas personalidades que eram reclusas, que eram solitárias, que eram carentes emocionalmente, encontrou para brigar diante do mundo.
A conquista do campeonato mundial representou também seu afastamento dos tabuleiros. Ele acabou perdendo o título por se recusar a enfrentar o desafiante, o soviético Anatoly Karpov. Só reapareceria em 1992, ao jogar contra o velho rival Spassky. A disputa foi na Iugoslávia, país que então sofria um embargo das Nações Unidas. Bob Fischer desafiou a proibição em troca de uma bolsa de 5 milhões de dólares e venceu a disputa. Em 1970, Bob Fischer disputou 2 partidas contra um prodígio brasileiro de 18 anos, um enxadrista que já se impunha no cenário internacional, Henrique Mecking, o Mequinho. O americano levou a melhor, uma vitória e um empate.
Ele jogava muito para ganhar, tanto de brancas como de pretas. As peças brancas têm o primeiro lance, então já saem mais atacando. Ele jogava de uma maneira bem agressiva e conhecia assim, as variantes, as aberturas de maneira assim, maravilhosa. Tinha um profundo conhecimento, entende?
Nos últimos anos de vida, Fischer passou a tomar posições americanas e mesmo antissemitas, mesmo sendo filho de uma judia. Chegou a comemorar o atentado de 11 de setembro. Rompido com os Estados Unidos, peregrinou por vários países até tornar-se um cidadão da Islândia, onde morreu de insuficiência renal. Fischer foi o maior símbolo do xadrez romântico, época em que homens não perdiam para computadores. Até os muitos equívocos cometidos por ele serviram para diferenciá-lo da perfeição das máquinas.
Pragu 9. marta 1943. godine. Šah je naučio da igra u 6. godini iz uputstva u šahovskoj garnituri koju je kupila njegova sestra. Prvu knjigu o šahu video je mjesec dana kasnije. U početku je igrao sam, da bi se godinu dana kasnije priključio Brooklynskom šahovskom klubu. 1956. godine Bobby Fischer postao je najmlađi juniorski šampion Sjedinjenih Američkih Država, a 2 godine kasnije i najmlađi seniorski. Oba rekorda i danas su na snazi. Sa 16 godina postaje i najmlađi svetski velemajstor, a to zvanje stekao je u bivšoj Jugoslaviji, na turniru u Portorožu.
Došao je u Beograd i otišao u hotel Slaviju, odnosno u šah klub Slavija, i hteo je da igra nekoliko partija ovako za trening. I on je tada počeo da igra šah u Beogradu, a pošto je došao u jednom malom džemperu bez odela, onda su ga ovi naši odveli kod nekog krojača da mu saši jedno lepo odelo, što je to i uradio, i tako se Fischer zbližio na razne načine sa našim ljudima.
I recimo za vreme njegovog boravka u Beogradu pre odlaska u Portorož, samo me je zasipao pitanjima o raznim varijantama. Meni je to bilo dosadno, pa sam ga ovako odbacio. I na plaži, na Adi Cigali, on mene opet pita za neku varijantu koju je vidio se igrala u Sibiru, neki nepoznati igrač. a ja sam podcjenjivao tu varijantu kao preambicioznu za crnoga. Međutim, u posljednjem kolu igramo nas dvojice, ja imam bele figure i on me uz partiju odigrao onaj potez za koji me pitao na plaži. Znači, saopštio mi je šta namerava da igra, ali ja nisam obratio pažnju.
Pobedom nad Borisom Spaskim u Reykjaviku 1972. godine postao je svetski šampion i tako prekinuo dominaciju sovjetskih šahista. 3 godine kasnije izgubio je titulu jer je odbio da igra meč protiv Anatolija Karpova, a onda se povukao iz javnosti na neko vreme.
Ja sam s njim imao tajno prijateljstvo u vreme njegovog samoizgnanstva od 20 godina. Kako sam išao u Ameriku, posjećivao sam ga po njegovoj želji, dopisivao se, hrabrio ga i ćutao o našoj vezi. Niko nije znao da ja imam kontakt sa njime. 2
decenije posle Reykjavika ponovo su se sreli Fischer i Spassky. U revanšu, koji se igrao na Svetom Stefanu i u Beogradu, Fischer je pobedio.
Sad on dođe u Jugoslaviju u momentu kad se ja trebalo idem na Karibe, nisam očekivao će doći. Međutim, čim je došao, izrazio je želju i zahtev da i ja budem sa njime dok je tu. I onda sam ja prvi jedini put pregazio svoju reč i moja supruga pokojna isto je rekla, kaže, ti si njegov prijatelj, moraš da ostaneš sada. I tako sam ostao za vreme meča. Meč je bio zanimljiv, ali ni oni Spassky više nisu bili na onoj igračkoj visini nego 20 godina ranije, kad su igrali prvi meč.
Kad je došao u Jugoslaviju da igra taj šah, Jugoslavija je pod sankcijama, a to znači ne smeš ništa sa njima ni da trguješ, niti da radiš. I on dobije u oči samog početka meča jedan telegram od ove administracije da ne smije da igra šah. I sad on po njegovom onako mogo je on to i malo i da pređe preko toga, međutim on uzme pa zgužva taj telegram, pljune u njega i baci ga u koš, a to je bilo na konferenciji za štampu gde je bilo oko 200 novinara iz sveta i naravno i američkih novinara i od toga se onda napravi veliki problem.
2004. godine uhapšen je u Japanu sa nevažećim američkim pasošem. Posle 8 meseci zatvora dozvoljeno mu je da otputuje na Island, gde je dobio državljanstvo i ostao do smrti.
Coldest period of the Cold War. The Soviet Union and the United States competed in space, in proxy wars, in athletic contests, and in that most personal and devastating metaphor for war, on the chessboard. One of the icons of that age, an American chess superstar, Bobby Fischer, has just died. Stephen Smith looks back on a most remarkable man and a very strange era indeed.
In the red corner, Boris Spassky, with the full might of the Soviet chess machine behind him. Facing him, a raw, Brooklyn-raised kid, Bobby Fischer. It was Reykjavik, 72, the depths of the Cold War.
It's going to go in there, I'm not going to stay up nights worrying. It's going to be over, pretty soon. And this little thing with me and Spassky is sort of a microcosm of the whole world political situation. You always read about, they suggest the two world leaders should sort of fight it out hand to hand or something. This is kind of that kind of thing now.
Crazy and conspiracy theory kind of mental atmosphere with accusations of color-coded yogurts and telepathic sabotage and hypnosis. Past his hotel room in Reykjavik when he played Spassky that time in 72, and you could hear him going chop and pow and kablam, and he was playing chess with himself. He had a great deal of surplus combative will.
At this chess shop in London today, a tribute to Fischer in the form of one of his most celebrated or notorious moves, from that world title clash with Spassky.
Jim's family name is Fischer, but unfortunately, that's where the resemblance ends.
This was the first game of the match, and it was a move that ricocheted around the world. He played bishop takes pawn, and Spassky looked as though he'd been hit by a bullet. He jerked back in his seat, and the reason is that after Spassky played this move, the bishop is trapped, it cannot escape. He would say, I represent no one but myself. He was a complete loner, he had no one around him, he cared about no one but himself, and he was devoted only to his own chess, at which, of course, his genius was unparalleled.
It was decades before Fischer played again, in Serbia, a sanctions-busting rematch against his old adversary, Spassky. More recently, he spent time in a Japanese jail on a passport charge.
I'm very happy to be leaving. I have nothing against Japan. You just have a criminal government here.
Not a tragic figure, but full of pathos, his story, and dying young as an irreducible loner in Iceland, the scene of his great triumph. Definitely one of the most original, witty, artistic players that there's ever been. That's not nothing.
And amazing.
He was every bit as reclusive in death as he was in life. His low-key burial in this modest grave in an Icelandic churchyard was attended only by his companion, the Japanese chess player Miyoko Watai, and a handful of close friends. Even the priest wasn't told until it was over.
When I arrived today, somebody pointed out that there was a new grave. I had absolutely no idea.
The priest's permission wasn't needed because the church and the graveyard are on land owned by a relative of one of Fischer's friends. The troubled American-born chess genius became legendary for defeating the Soviet Union's Boris Spassky in a match held in Iceland. But Fischer then lived largely in seclusion, emerging occasionally to deliver outspoken, sometimes anti-Semitic comments. He even praised the September the